Hi, this is Paul and Sam. Many of you recognize Sam from various of my videos, and we're going to talk estuary today. Sam has made a couple of unlisted videos with a few ideas about estuary, and so I thought, well, why don't we have a conversation about this? So let's jump in, Sam. So you've got lots of ideas, maybe more ideas than I have. So let's start with some of your thoughts.
Sure, I feel a little bit like Bob Dylan. My unlisted videos are often more popular than my listed videos. um, but yeah, well, I mean, I've been listening to you and other people talk about the estuary and even just beyond what the estuary is, sort of just broader ideas of where our community could and should go next, and even who is our community, and what makes it a coherent thing, and who's in and who's out, and all of those sorts of questions. So I made a couple of videos really just kind of processing my thoughts, and I sent those to Paul and a couple other people. I would share them more widely, but I realized that I doxed myself in those videos, so I won't give the link publicly, but hopefully we can talk through all of that here.
Okay. Well, it might, I've had a couple conversations about this. I had a conversation yesterday with the Thoughtful Ape from the Discord server, and perhaps it's helpful for me to lay out some of the genesis and origin of these ideas. In many ways, these came about after, obviously some of it comes about out of my frustration as a minister in terms of trying to find ways to connect with people who won't darken the door of a church. Part of it comes from my experience of making videos about Jordan Peterson, starting the local meetup, being a regular participant in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, recognizing that a lot of people need a space that isn't exactly church. And it's in church's mission, and I think the interest of the church in mission to find ways to create those spaces. And I think that makes churches healthier, because actually right now someone just sent me a video of a guy who's he's a Christian on YouTube talking about politics and all the normal issues evangelicals talk about in all of the normal ways evangelicals talk about them. And I listen to this and I think, I can understand how in some ways this individual is serving the church, but there are many, many people who, for one reason or another, simply can't engage in that conversation. And I recognize that churches, for a very long time, have sort of an insular self-sufficiency to the degree that they can't have they struggle to have productive conversations with these people. Now, if you live in the Bible Belt and most of your friends go to church with you, then this might not seem like a problem. But if you don't live in the Bible Belt, or you've got some aspect of your life or some significant relationship with a person who has an aspect of their life that sort of puts them on the outside of church,
Mm-hmm.
churches have a tremendous, they're sort of like Henry Ford selling cars. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. And that's pretty much where the conversation ends. Now, obviously, Ford Motor Company has changed its ways since the days of Henry Ford. But, and so then in watching what had happened around my YouTube channel and with the Bridges of Meaning Discord server and with our local what was then a Jordan Peterson meetup, I thought the church needs to have a space for conversation. Now, someone could rightly criticize me by saying, yeah, but Paul, you're mostly having this conversation. Most of the members of your church don't participate in the conversations you have, and that's fair. At the same time, the members of my congregation have been generous towards these conversations. They've been generous with my time. They've been generous with our facility. And as the members of my church, not all of them, but some of them, as the members of my church, bit by bit, come into community with some of these members who are outside of the church as part of the meetup, I see bonds growing. And it's also the fact that for many members of my church, their children won't come to church. Their grandchildren are not being brought to church. And part of this is because the children of the membership have come to the conclusion that, okay, church is doing their thing, but it's functionally irrelevant to my life. And I think they're wrong.
Maybe until I get married, but yeah.
Maybe until I get married, and maybe there'll be some itch that I don't understand that I'll want to somehow have my children be raised in some kind of faith. But the church has simply done an exceedingly poor job connecting. I wanted to say connecting what's happening in the newspaper, but by newspapers. Maybe they're still thinking about the newspaper. What's happening in the day-to-day manner of people's lives with what I believe are, in fact, what the church is talking about, should be talking about, but often in different language. And so for me, at least in terms of the church, an estuary is a place where the church can get to know, the church can learn a little bit, the church can learn some things, and those outside the church can learn some things. Because my experience of those outside the church is often they have a list of biases and prejudices about the church, which are about as unfounded as what the church has about those outside of it. And so I look at this disconnect and say, you know, these people can understand each other. These people are neighbors. These people are friends. These people can have a productive conversation. And in fact, I think both sides would welcome and enjoy productive engagement with each other surrounding things that matter to both of them. This doesn't seem impossible. And in fact, my experience on my YouTube channel and with the meetups and with all of the things that have flowed from there has been, I'm finding that both sides are enjoying it. Now, both sides tend to be busy and skeptical, and so I find resistance on the church side. Well, if these people really are interested in what's going on in here, they should come and sit in a service. Well, okay. All right, but even people that I've seen coming in from watching my YouTube channel who, quite frankly, get more hours of me each week than the members of my own congregation, those people come into church and they're kind of like, what?
This isn't like what I expected Paul's YouTube channel inside a building to look like.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this is where this all began. And I, right away when I had no idea how much impact releasing one word would have. It was that demonstrates that it was a
well-chosen word.
A well-chosen word. But I'm frankly delighted at the productive mess that I see it creating. So, and I see you as part of that productive mess, Sam. So let's do some messy production together.
All right. Well, I mean, I think part of this is that America, the West and perhaps America in particular, is entering a post-Christian age that is very unfamiliar to itself in terms of its own history. In times past, how the church related to the larger community was more straightforward, and that the church has a lot of experience of living in that world, but it's starting to live in a new world, and that this is bringing up all sorts of new questions that need to be answered in terms of how churches relate to things. Like, even when I was a kid, like going to like the Cub Scouts, it sort of made sense that the Cub Scouts met in like the local mainline community church, and that some of the people in the Cub Scouts attended that congregation, but not everyone did. But it wasn't weird that it was at the church, and the nursery school was there. And yeah, kids, you know, even Jewish kids went to the nursery school that was technically at a mainline Christian church. And, you know, like all those sorts of things that, you know, talking about going to church didn't seem weird. But like, that was, you know, the 1990s, I guess, and I'm not that old, but even I can notice that things have changed in the couple decades since then. And like you, well, so I grew up, I mean, I'm from the Midwest, which is like, if you were to draw around the Bible Belt, you would say, yeah, I live in the Bible Belt, but then it's like, well, Chicago's not the Bible Belt. No. Chicago is a different thing. Chicago is a coastal city in the middle of the country. And if you grow up in sort of the snooty suburbs, then it's even more like the East Coast or the West Coast than, say, if I were to drive an hour north into rural Wisconsin, right? But at the same time, rural Wisconsin's only an hour away from me, whereas it's not an hour away from Long Island or something like that. So so that's something that I can kind of see that things are changing. Like when I grew up, you know, like I said about the Cub Scouts and all that, that was kind of normal. But in like high school, it was very weird to talk about religion. In college, it was even weirder to talk about religion. Working in liberal-oriented tech companies since college, it is even weirder to talk about religion. And it's super weird to even talk about politics or anything that doesn't sort of meet a party line anymore. So over the course of my life, I've mainly lived in liberal places, and I've mainly worked and been surrounded in liberal places, but I grew up in a very conservative, you might even say fundamentalist oriented church, and have mainly attended churches that are kind of like that. Like you talked about, so in the video where you talked about, like, I think a good example of this, and then we can branch into other directions. So in the video about the founding fathers, where you talked about Sam Adams, you talked about Park Street Church, right? And you said you maybe had cousins or aunts or uncles or some sort of relatives who went to Park Street Church. And Park Street Church is, if you go to Boston, you can't miss it. If you go to the Boston Commons, there's one big, super stereotypically New England looking church right on the Boston Common with a big steeple, and it's on the Freedom Trail. And Sam Adams is buried in their backyard. And it's, you know, it's a holdout conservative Puritan church right in the middle of Boston. And when I lived in Boston, that was where I went to church. And you know how weird it is for me to be the person who went to that church.
When did you go to that church?
I was in grad school in Boston in 2016, 17.
What service did you go to?
The traditional one, of course.
You would have been there with my sister and my brother-in-law.
Probably. Yeah,
because they're there every Sunday morning at the traditional service. They sat in the same seat. You probably would have recognized them.
It's a somewhat big church. It's almost 1,000 people on a Sunday, maybe 500 or something.
But my sister and brother-in-law, my brother-in-law's been there his whole life, and my sister, you know, went there, you know, when she met my brother-in-law, and you know, so anyway, so yeah.
And Gordon Hugenberger was my pastor.
Gordon Hugenberger. I did the eulogy at my sister's service, and Gordon did a nice talk at the calling hours for us. Wow. And wonderful. You know, my sister and brother-in-law just love him. So yeah, funny. Mm-hmm. I didn't know we had this connection.
Right. right? And you know how weird it is that I would go to that church.
Yes, yes.
Um, just, but Sam Adams is buried in the backyard, so I guess it just makes sense. So that church is sort of something like a symbol of the relationship to Christianity and modern American society, right? It doesn't, it's there in the middle still, but it doesn't know how it relates to anything
Yes.
anymore.
Yes.
And it's on the freedom trail, right?
And so Park Street is, some people have likened the movie First Reformed, where First Reformed was in fact a museum. Oh, you had a little worship service there with a few odd people, but it was basically a museum. And so Park Street remains a living, breathing, vital congregation, but they are also a museum. And
Yes.
my niece, for one of her summer jobs, was basically at Park Street giving the little talk to the waves of tourists that would come in, understanding how that church functioned within the broader ecosystem. And surely churches continue to function within the broader ecosystem in American society today. I mean, it's national news, Jerry Falwell Jr. and his wife and the pool boy. But the way they function within the ecosystem is quite a bit different than during the Revolutionary War period, even if it may not be the case that fewer Americans go to church today than went to church on Sundays during the Revolutionary War. I mean,
Right.
A lot of people premise it on, well, fewer Americans go to church today. No, not necessarily. A lot fewer went to church, in that period than today. And if you read history of that period, you'll begin to recognize that, the religious convictions of George Washington and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were interesting.
Yes.
And but today there is a severe disconnect where in some ways religious and people who don't consider themselves religious are having real difficulties having conversations.
Yeah. And the default is that, at least in sort of like, if you're a millennial working at a tech company with a lot of other millennials, the default is that religion is weird and silly. And if you accidentally let slip out that you went to church this past Sunday, people will take note of that and maybe quickly change the subject. There is no natural way to bring that up in conversation.
Except that with certain forms of what people would not consider religiosity, well, I was meditating this morning. That would be considerably less weird than saying you went to church on Sunday. The fact that maybe you went to yoga, you go to yoga in the morning before, that would be considerably less weird.
Or even a mindfulness retreat or something in, the desert of Arizona or something, when, people might get interested in that, or doing some interesting things at Burning Man, that's totally normal. But going to an actual Christian church regularly on a Sunday, that's weird, and people don't know how to deal with that. And a lot of Christians that I know that are in those environments just learn to keep it quiet, right? Even as evangelical, as much fervor as they have for spreading the good news, they even then after a while learn how to just not really bring that up very much, unless it's with trusted people. So that's why I think is part of the context for this whole estuary thing, is that the circumstances for the American church, Europe maybe has been dealing with this a little bit longer than we have, although even then it's just so different, right? When there's state churches and you Italy, sure, way less people go to church in Italy than go to the church in the US right now, but it's Italy, for heaven's sakes, right? So it's just a very different and new thing. So it requires a little bit of a shifting of priority and strategy in terms of how the church is going to relate to the outside world. And places like Sacramento are probably at the cutting edge of having this be a difficult problem.
Yeah, well, Sacramento is Sacramento in many ways is sort of an estuary in terms of the cultures of America, because we're the state capital in a very blue state, but we're also a valley ag town. And in the Central Valley of California tends to be where you'll have your red state critters. But you've got a fair amount of blue state critters. So Sacramento itself is extraordinarily diverse and has created for itself a culture which I would say is estuary friendly. And in that way, it's not exactly the Bay Area, but it's certainly not Fresno. So, it's so that's, and as an,
And you're literally an estuary.
yeah, it is literally an estuary because the Delta is right here. And so as the retired chief hydrologist for the state of California who goes to my church says, the size of the Delta watershed here is a quarter of the size of the Mississippi watershed. And when you think about how much water flows through the Mississippi Delta, the California Delta is a significant estuary for the West Coast. But
well, Chicago is built on an estuary too, but only kind of, because our rivers flow into freshwater lakes. So there's it's not really quite the same thing, but it's kind of the same thing.
We'll let it count for now.
Sure.
But right away, people, and I'm not blaming anyone for here, because others have said, well, you sure didn't give a lot of details with that. You basically said a word and everybody jumped to their own conclusions about the word, which is fine. But the initial idea was that Paul Vanderklay is starting an estuary in which all these other people can inhabit. And okay, in a sense, I've already done that by my YouTube channel. So as I said, the church channel, there's a Livingstone's Christian Reformed Church YouTube channel that has less than 1,000 subscribers, and most videos there get, less than 200 views. And that's mostly me. And then my personal YouTube channel. And so there is a difference between them. And that's sort of the difference between Livingstone's Online and Estuary. Estuary is much more my YouTube channel, where I am thinking out loud, having conversations with people of various backgrounds, and exploring what can be explored. Now, how this, and then you and I have spoken before about, there are lots of cool ideas that I have and what others have in terms of how to pursue like-minded ventures like this. Mm-hmm. But I am not in a position at this point to be founder of Estuary Inc., in that right. I do have a day job, and I don't intend to leave the Christian ministry to pursue this. Might become would it even be a parachurch organization? I mean, what kind of thing would it be? But my goal has been to, well, let's see what can be done, and maybe partnerships, and find people and find money, and I'd rather see 3 or 4 or 5 significant estuary enterprises launch. And the fact that even though there's Bridges of Meaning, which is the Bridges of Meaning Discord, which is a significant estuary project, just in terms of numbers of people who are relating to it. But I'm in conversation with other individuals that are not very visible on my YouTube channel, if at all, who are in fact thinking along these lines and starting things that are very similar to this, but not necessarily in alignment, not necessarily Christian. But I've been in conversation with a lot of these individuals, and so I am not looking to sort of found something to either enfold or exclude these efforts. My goal is much more to facilitate more and more of these efforts, that, to see them launch. And mm-hmm. so then when I watched your, I talked to you and Hank's been on the channel, you guys coming out of I like the fact that in some ways, some of these beyond meetup projects are sort of growing out of meetups.
Yeah.
Because you and Hank and some others in Chicago, you've now got a face-to-face relationship. You can, whether or not you can do it with COVID, but you can go and see each other face to face. You can know each other's families to a degree. You can have a in real life relationship. And I would love, and that's been the case of our Jordan Peterson meetup here in Sacramento that is continuing to evolve. There's another pastor in Edmonton, Alberta, who is also doing some of these things. And he's a Christian Reformed minister. And, you know, I'd like to see, you know, other Christian Reformed churches and other not even non-Christian Reformed churches up and down the West Coast also develop into some of these things. And in many ways, I see Urban Abbey, the host of what was going to be a conference this September, and hopefully, Lord willing, September 2021, you know, with myself and Peugeot and Vervaeke. And I had that conversation with Scotland Morrison about Urban Abbey and its ethos. These are all estuary-like enterprises. And whereas it may come to pass that one day I am the leader of some estuary Inc. at some point, that day is probably not in the next year or two. And it's my practice to think in public, because if I wouldn't have a YouTube channel if I didn't think in public. I find it extremely helpful to think in public because
you get feedback.
I get feedback, and all of you can error correct my thinking, whether I like it or not. And that's actually a blessing, says the book of Proverbs.
Right.
So,
and you don't just get handpicked, curated feedback. You get all sorts of feedback that you didn't expect, and maybe some that you don't quite want, but it's out there and it happens, and that's part of it. And it's the way of turning conversations and making them a way of butting up against reality instead of just having them be pretend, I think.
That's
something
right.
Like that.
And also then to have my ideas tested much more rigorously by all of you. You know, maybe my idea of not starting the estuary is a bad idea. And maybe that bad idea will get beaten out of me in this process. That could happen too. Maybe I had an idea with a word that I can't pull off, but someone else comes around and actually makes it happen. And so, you know, Christianity has this way of both infusing people with value and also making individuals to one degree or another disposable. And I think both of those ideas are true and correct. And so my participation in this is, you know, in some ways disposable.
By making people disposable, you mean that it creates something that's bigger than the individual, so even if the individuals drop off, it keeps going.
Exactly.
There are other ways. When I first heard you say it, I was like, what? Oh, that's what you mean.
No,
right.
because and the Apostle Paul exemplifies this in the New Testament when he says, he looks at the Corinthian church, and some of them are fighting, well, they're fans of Paul and other fans of Apollo and other fans of Peter. And Paul's like, you know, no, we are the body of Jesus Christ. And so Paul Vanderklay, you know, to whatever degree God uses Paul Vanderklay, so be it. But the mission and the effort goes far beyond him, out of love for people.
Right. So we should at least mention Jordan Peterson in all of this.
Okay.
Right? Because part of what's going on with your YouTube channel and Bridges of Meaning and all of this is connected to something that he got going. And it's been 3 or 4 years since that ball started rolling. I'm not sure if we've really found any clearer the words to describe what exactly it is that's going on. But it was something like there had been this built up animosity and confusion and distrust and lack of ability to communicate between kind of, I don't know, the Christian culture and especially the intellectual American culture. And that he's somehow just like, with, you know, some strange lectures, bridged that divide almost immediately in a way that was new and refreshing, and that a lot of people found exciting and meaningful, and some people even found life-changing, right? And so your channel got going just sort of trying to talk about what's happening there and sort of building off of that. And so something involved in what was going on around the wake of Jordan Peterson in 2017, 2018, thereabouts, is connected to what we're doing. But your criticism of Jordan Peterson, which I think is totally valid, is that he was not institutionally minded. He was, you know, the one-man traveling show. He went around to a whole bunch of cities. You saw him, I saw him. Hundreds of thousands of people saw him all over the world, giving his one-man evangelization tour, you know, telling people to clean their rooms and get their lives in order. And to the extent that it did things, it did a lot of good things. But it was so focused on him that, you know, some health stuff and whatever, and he's off the scene, and seemingly that influence just dissipates, right? There are some things that have stuck around that are sort of clearly moving in the wake of and in the direction that he had last been pointing in. But it's interesting which of those things have kept their momentum and which haven't. But the thing is he didn't have an institution to keep momentum beyond himself.
Yes.
And so we want to do something, we the church, want to do something that doesn't have that downside, and that's able to pick up on some of the good things he got going and to give it institutional support and structure and longevity, and perhaps a clearer focus and a clearer telos than what he was doing.
Yes.
And so we don't want to just be the same version of Jordan Peterson, but just Paul Vanderklay. And then, you know, once Paul, you know, quits and retires or whatever, that it dissipates in the same sort of way. And that is, I think, the difference. And so what exactly is it that we want to do that does that?
That's a real good question. And I, part of the reason that, so we had, you were there, we had on Fridays on the Discord server, we have our, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. California time, we have our little question and answer for me, which we do different things. And then Andrea with the Bangs, who I had a conversation with about Estuary, said, oh, let's talk more about Estuary after the Q&A, which we did. And oh, where was I going with this? You know, part of the point, Joey, who's from our meetup here, I thought he made a really strong point when he said, because my point was, I have a hard time laying down in words what's actually going on. Because yes, we are in Jordan Peterson's wake, and we're also sort of in my wake. I sort of played around and made some extra currents in his wake, and we created some structures that have endured. And the meetups that we have created downstream of Jordan Peterson, I think, have endured, while, to my knowledge, most of the rest of the Jordan Peterson meetups have just evaporated. And I think part of the reason we have skills of doing that is because our experience with institutions like the church and the institutional church have helped us gain a bit of longevity and structure and institutionalization. But the best, when I looked around, the best I could do was offer a metaphorical image to what I saw happening. And that image is an estuary.
It's a very prophetic thing to do.
Well, and it's because some people might say, well, Jordan Peterson was around for 2 to 3 years, and that's a long time. Well, I don't think 2 to 3 years is anything.
Yeah, well, that's all Jesus really did too.
That's right. But I think we have only begun to see the impact of that wave that Jordan was and rode. And I think what we are doing in this space is actually of potentially of vital transformative power, not just in our own individual lives, but potentially for the church. Because I think what we are doing can offer churches that have painted themselves into a corner a new idea of doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want I don't want it to narrow too quickly. And so, for example, TJ, Charlie at the Discord launched a new Discord, and at the I haven't told him this yet, but he'll hear it, I'm sure. You know, it was so funny because when the Sacramento group launched the Bridges of Meaning Discord, the reason we did it was because many people out there are not going to have the opportunity to have a face-to-face meetup group. And so, at least in the meantime, as a stopgap measure, this can be an online group for people for whom face-to-face meetings are likely not presently, nor may they ever be, a convenient way for them to get together. And we have a number of individuals for whom that is true. And then when Charlie launched the Outpost, he gave the reason for being for the Outpost almost exactly what I had heard the local guys say. And I told Joey and Tyler, Rick, I said, you know, that is in many ways the highest form of flattery. Mm-hmm. Because don't look at what Charlie is doing as competition. Look at it as complementary, because your idea was in fact so good that, well, maybe he didn't quite get that idea from what you had created, but the idea was so good, he decided to take the initiative and do it himself. And I would love to see that sort of thing multiply. When after I did my YouTube channel and I saw this second wave, the Randos and Mary and Karen and others start their own YouTube channels, that to me was the greatest compliment they could ever give, because in a sense they saw me doing something. Hang on, someone's really in earnest to talk to me, so I'm going to pause this. Wrong number's one thing, wrong addresses. Something else. You're having services here for my niece this week? No. You're not the way?
No.
Do you know the way? It's like, you shouldn't ask a pastor that question. Anyway, so I want to see people start stuff and try stuff, because you don't know where it will go. And, you know, sometimes I'll talk to Karen and Mary and, you know, Bern has his power, and Bern Powers has his channel, and, you know, Bern has his power too. But, you know, if we can incentivize not just individuals to try things, but even have people come together. And I've seen that in our local meetup, and get some things going. Well, I'd rather start 10 or 15 things than one, because, you know, who knows where 10 or 15 things go. Often what happens is 10 or 15 things go, and not, you know, a bunch of them peter out, but some along the way pick up. The real key is that you're investing in people, and they are gaining capacity and learning and trying. And again, it's the same reason I think out loud in public, in that I get smarter when people disagree with me.
Yeah. And while giving people responsibility gives them a chance to learn from the feedback of experience and success and failure too.
Right.
And it's also okay if we try and do things and not all of them work either. Right. I think that there have been some people who are a little bit too scared of failure to want to try and do new things. It's okay if we mess up, and it's likely we will. But then we will learn something and we'll keep getting better, and that is how you get better. So I guess maybe since we've scared away anyone but the dedicated after 40 minutes, I think that I would like to share some of the thoughts that I had when I imagined you first talking about estuary. So I'll give something of like, a condensed and refined and slightly better version of the unlisted videos that I teased about. So what I think is a really interesting.
By the way, you and your wife are adorable together. You really are. I
Well,
was just
thank
so
you.
charmed by it.
Thank you. And so my wife is in a group called Don't Mom Alone. So there's a podcast called Don't Mom Alone, and then they have like discussion groups, like sanctioned discussion groups, right? And there are leaders of those sanctioned discussion groups, and the leaders of the sanctioned discussion groups have a joint private Facebook page where they can discuss stuff and share stuff and coordinate stuff. And she has a super slick website. And if you want to start your own Don't Mom Alone podcast listen group, then you just click a couple buttons and they send you some resources and you can register and you can find groups if they already exist, et cetera, et cetera. And then the host of this Don't Mom Alone group will go on traveling tours where she goes to these groups and hosts a live version of the podcast at these groups. And that's exciting for the people because they get to meet the celebrity in the flesh and then, you know, have some meet and greet and elbow rubbing time afterwards. And, you know, and I think she's probably writing a book and, you know, that sort of thing, right? So that's a little similar to what you're doing and a little different,
Yep.
right? And so, and also it's also just interesting, all the different voices in this. There's just really clearly a spectrum of openness to conscientiousness, I guess, to use Jordan Peterson's terms, right? The people who are like, oh, we'll just try a bunch of things and, you know, we'll see where it goes. And isn't the world an exciting, wonderful, you know, arena of possibility? And, oh, don't try and put too many boundaries around it because, you know, we might kill what we have going. And the people are like, who knows what the rules are? What's going on? We need structure, we need lines, we need a plan, we need you know, right? There's just a little bit of that personality clash, and some of that, you know, those two different temperaments need to work together to use the best that each of those perspectives have to offer and not just ignore each other because they're both partially right. But I guess I sometimes am a little bit more in the practical, we need to do something, we need lines, we need a battle plan, we need an organization. And also, well, I don't know, I've tried to start some startups in the past and stuff like that. I'm a little bit, I don't know, entrepreneurially minded and sometimes think, you know, how do we make this as successful as we can, as quick as we can? And there are dangers to trying to do that sort of thing. But also, if you don't do that sort of thing, you can be leaving harvest unharvested or wheat unharvested in the fields. So thinking about that Don't Mom Alone podcast, I feel like right now we have a couple meetup groups and a couple things that are similar-ish to us out there. But there is no shared coherent structure, really. They're like, no one besides like people really on the inside know that your Sacramento group really has any tangible connection to our Chicago group, right? There's no website that lists our two groups as part of the same whatever anything that one could find out there. And so part of me thinks that we could benefit from a little bit more of that sort of thing. And I think that you and I both agree that a lot of the Jordan Peterson stuff and your stuff has been driven through the internet, and that there are wonderful things about the internet and that it allows you to connect to people all over the planet Earth. And it also can have something of a self-filtering effect where you find people that are different from you in some ways, but there's at least something drawing you together. But there's something just a little bit disembodied and dissatisfying about something that's purely internet-based. Right? We're human beings. We need flesh and blood interaction. We need the words to be made flesh, as I said, instead of just being ephemeral. And so I think that, like, I think you and I would also both say that some of the most meaningful stuff that has come out of this are the interpersonal interactions from our live in-person group. And so really, I think what I really want for this group to do a little bit better is to make it easier for other people to get that. Because your group has had the benefit of at least you, as well as a bunch of, you know, other interesting folks. And the Chicago group, you know, it took a bunch of things going right for it to be able to succeed. And it almost didn't, and stuff like that. And so there are some of those barriers that we could make easier for others to overcome. Like I think I said in one of my videos, there's no New York City meetup group. Surely there's enough listeners of your podcast or the various other podcasts in New York City where there's critical mass to get something like this going, but it hasn't happened yet. And things like that, and ditto Boston or Houston or wherever you want to name. So what can we do to help make that easier? That really is what is at the front of my mind. And I was like talking to my wife the other night. I'm like, so you go to that podcast group on Thursdays? Could you tell me a little bit more about how it works? And when she was talking to me about it, I was like, well, that's a great idea. Yeah, why? So I feel like when I first heard you talk about the estuary, this is what came to mind. I'm like, oh, Paul's trying to do something like this. And it has been interesting listening to what everyone heard you say when they heard you talking about the estuary. It was something of a Rorschach test where different people, immediately came to mind what their vision was, and that said a lot about who they were and what they wanted, and also about what you had been communicating. So I feel like some ways that we could foster in-person interactions are the meetups. We already know how to do them, and we know that they're good when we can get them to work. And I think we just need to figure out a couple ways that we could be more intentional about helping more of those things grow. And I feel like that is the foundation layer of turning this into a structure that isn't just technologically mediated, but is interpersonally mediated. And Luke is totally right that there is something absolutely different about interacting with people in an actual in-person community than whatever techno-babble interactions that we have in between. So I feel like building that foundation layer is really important to anything else that we want to do. But a group that gets together once a week, once a month, every other week, whatever, needs something to talk about, right? It gets boring if you don't have new things to talk about. A book club that doesn't read new books, it doesn't exist for much longer. And so I feel like that's the role that the internet media, that your channel and the other constellation of related channels can supply. It's the material, and it's new material that can sort of drive the conversation forward and keep it interesting and keep new thoughts coming into people's head and allow things to not get too stale, right? I think that's really the role of the internet media in terms of that. And maybe we could talk sometime, I don't want to lose my train of thought just yet, about how we could maybe even help that, right? Help the internet side of things be a little bit easier to find and navigate than it currently is. Right now it's a little esoteric and takes a little bit of expertise that some people will invest the time in to learn, but some people won't. And so we're leaving some audience behind by making it as difficult as it currently is to find all of these things. So I think that the meetups are like the foundation layer, and that there are ways to help get them started. Like you and Job and Van Donk, we're going to do your West Coast evangelization tour, the first missionary journey that got blown off course by a pandemic and crashed into an island and had to, go. Yeah.
And poor Job had to go back to the Netherlands.
And Job had, well, at least he got to go back. So that's one sort of thing. And then I feel like sort of you going around or other people going around and hosting those sorts of live events, because you saw Jordan Peterson in person, you've probably been to some other sort of things. It is more fun seeing people in person than it is watching a YouTube video. I will pay 30, 40, maybe even $50 for a ticket to go see some really interesting people talk at a theater in my city, that I won't pay 30, 40, $50 for a whole year subscription to their YouTube channel or something like that. And it's exciting seeing the audience and hearing the live interactions. And I don't know, I can remember the live conversations that I saw either Jordan Peterson or other people have much more clearly than I can remember a particular YouTube video. I can remember particular things that Jordan Peterson said when I saw him in person, and like all of his YouTube videos are kind of a fuzzy memory at this point. So there's something about going to a live event that I think is superior to an online YouTube conversation. And then I think retreats like the thing that you had in Connecticut are also a really cool idea. And then I think sort of like conferences like the thing that it was in Thunder Bay would also be cool. So I think like in a certain sense, we've already kind of trial run, or at least thought about, I'm not proposing anything that radically different, really. I'm not trying to claim any stroke of creative brilliance or novelty. I'm just trying to say, here are a bunch of pieces. Maybe if we put them together like this, it would work better and reinforce itself better. So I've been going for a while now. I'm curious to hear what you think of that.
Well, I agree, and in many ways, what you've been asking for is more of a structure around. I mean, you're exactly right. The Connecticut event, I was going to do another such event in May or June.
Yeah.
We were going in March. We were going to go up the coast and stop at Salem, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. And what we've been trying to do with each stop is, just like we did in Tucson, is to give the local church and some of the people who are watching my videos, kind of to bring them together at the same place. Because what happens in the church is that the church the pastor isn't watching my videos, probably, maybe some of them are, but most of them aren't. And they're like, well, will anybody show up for this? And then when people show up, churches are like, oh, people will show up for this. We usually have to like give away bad food or have some, a tub full of candy to have people show up, and they never come back, and we don't actually talk to them, and maybe we're giving them free babysitting and we call it Vacation Bible School. And so then when people actually show up, pastors are like, and they show up willing and ready to talk about the kinds of things that we talk about on my channel, then suddenly pastors are interested and like, oh, well, whether or not they stick with it, there's potential there.
But what I'm saying is like, say COVID goes away and you go back to Salem, Oregon, and there's a pastor there. What concrete steps or instructions can that pastor follow to do something that that's actually possible for them to do?
Yeah.
What are we asking them to do? Are we asking them to subscribe to their own meetup.com account, create their own thing with its own, unique name, and then, like, what is the connection between you being there and that pastor from Salem CRC or whatever church that it is, and what happens after that? And how is that connected to Chicago? How is that connected to Sacramento? How does it reinforce itself? How is it not just its own island left to fend for itself, and those sorts of things?
Yeah. And the problem with the current system is that connection is me, because I know the name of the pastor in Salem. And in most cases, I trust those pastors to have both enough initiative and experience to say, okay, what next things do I need to do to sort of help this group fan into flame? So Pete Vanderbeek up in Edmonton, Alberta, he's a transitional specialist. So he doesn't have a church. He goes around to different churches when
there's a gap in their pastorate or something.
Exactly. And so he's been doing this in Edmonton because that's where he lives, and he's actually got a group going. Of course, Vendonk has his group, and Vendonk's been slowly, talking to his congregation to have the congregation pick up on this. But you're very much right that we don't have a curriculum, which would tend to be what, let's say, this moms group has. And part of the reason I've been, actually, one of the things that I wanted to talk to, let me say this. Everything that you're saying that you're saying, I agree with, and I would love to see take the next steps. Okay. So don't hear any resistance from me, because we definitely need more structure. And the structure that we have now is still quite implicit. Part of the reason that I am hesitant to make the, well, I look at, you and Joey, both you and Joey have got some, you've got some other connections in some other,
we worked for that same millennial tech company that
exactly.
I was kind of alluding to earlier.
So there are connections and relationships out there right now, but also what I know is that there are more connections and relationships out there that are outside of the groups that you guys know. And so so if we start something with this, I'm totally fine with that. I just can't put in jeopardy some of those other relationships, because there are, right now everybody is, the problem is that I know more than what you guys know in terms of the potential and the opportunities out there, and not all of those things I can talk publicly about. So then I've got, there's a whole nother layer of this, which is, part of me is wondering at what point the Christian Reformed Church is going to, stop with its rash about Jordan Peterson and say, this, I look at my own denomination and I think, how slow can you be on some of this stuff, people? You're worried about this culture war over here. Forget the darn culture war and start talking to people. And I don't care if they're right, left, center. I don't care what they have. If they have eyes and ears and a mouth and can talk to them. But you're exactly right in that if we had more structure, it would be easier for Rob and for Pete and for John to get more support. The pause that I have with that is, I'm really hesitant in terms of some local branding. So first of all, a mom's group, those things, any pastor knows. Women's Bible studies, moms groups. Those things are about as easy as, tripping on a bad sidewalk. Moms, once they have that baby, boy, are they desperate for a community. Boy, do they need wisdom. It's a great idea. I don't take anything away from them, but the thing naturally flows. There are other aspects. One of the really interesting moments in your conversation with your wife was, you're talking about this stuff, and part of you is like, wouldn't this be great? Would you go to this? And your wife's like, no. and part of where this group, the groups have grown out of, is that there is a male-female dynamic to this. And whereas in church, I'm in favor of women's Bible studies, I'm in favor of men's Bible studies, and I'm in favor of Bible studies where everybody's together. I like all three, and I'm not gonna prejudice against any of them. So part of this is the reason that, yes, we need more structure. And when we come out of COVID, I think it will be really good to probably have a more coordinated effort in terms of the next missionary tour to finally get up to the Pacific Northwest, but also for me to come to Chicago and for me to go to New Jersey, because I'm from New Jersey, and the New York, New Jersey area, and Boston. I can do Boston, and I will do another retreat. And it would be nice to have at least some platform by which there's more cohesion here. At this point, that's just all sort of running through.
Right. It needs to be building on something.
Yes.
Right. Instead of just sort of flashes in a bunch of dislocated pans. Right.
And the because when I did research before the Connecticut retreat, I did that Survey Monkey and I put it out there, and the message that came back through very clearly was that, we watch Paul on YouTube, and it'd be fun to meet Paul and to have 2 or 3 days and to have a private chat with Paul. All that would be fun. That's sort of a function of kind of the celebrity stuff. And that is what it is. But also what came through strongly was the people wanted to meet each other, because people have the sense that a lot of the other people, that they're a lot of the other people out there listening to this channel and interested in estuary and these conversations, they're also interesting people. And
Yeah.
so there is, and that's what I think.
And are there some near me? Because that's the weird thing. Like it used to be when, shows were on cable news, you could reliably trust that if you brought up a popular TV show at the water cooler, that someone there might know what you're talking about. But when there's just so many different podcasts and so many YouTube channels and stuff like that, well, man, I really love this pastor from Sacramento, but I have no clue. And I have, of extremely low probability that I can bring this up with anyone I know and they'll know what I'm talking about. And so it's frustrating and a little bit lonely to have something that you enjoy so much, but no one to share it with in your in-person life. And so we need to find a way to help make it easier to bridge that back into reality.
And to give it more visibility. No,
Yes.
You're exactly right with this, because, I mean, you more than others have also been saying, much to my fear sometimes, when are Christians going to wake up to this? I mean, to me, with my denomination, I'm less worried about that because I know those cats and I can handle those cats. I've lived my whole life in that. The broader evangelical world, ooh, that's a lot bigger world. And the issues out there, as you well know more than anyone, those are complex issues. But yes. One of the churches, we were talking to Tripp in Seattle, and if we had something a little bit more visible,
with a track record that hasn't caused any problems yet and has had multiple successes.
I'm keeping my wife away from the pool boy. We don't have a pool boy.
Right, because people need track records to trust doing a new and risky thing.
But so in some ways, on one hand, I very much want to keep addressing Christians and the church. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I also want to keep them at bay because I'm a minister, because of the type of content I have, because of some of my commitments, I will tend to trigger a tribal ambition among people that, oh, look, maybe Paul will be able to do to the atheist kind of like Jordan Peterson did. And that tribal game, that I listen to a lot of I listened to James. So James Tour had a conversation with Stephen. So James Tour's both world-class scientists, Discovery Institute. And I was listening to how James Tour is conducting that conversation. And again, I've got a world of respect when James Tour talks about the fact that we have no idea how life really started. I mean, a lot of these scientists are just, they're just making crap up, and they've basically willfully allowed a whole generation of people that just say, well, science knows how life started. And I love it that James Tour is coming out and saying, you're all full of shit. We don't have any idea how this started, and you can't prove it. I have my credentials. All of you know my credentials. And so when I'm calling BS on all of you, you have to listen, because he's a credible scientist. But when James Tour, as he was conducting that conversation, he slid into this evangelical tribal mode that I think is, because it's so
I mean, you said Discovery Institute, and I immediately know what you mean.
Yeah, because it's so tribal, I think it betrays the actual mission of the church. Now, tribalism is natural, it's normal, it's essential to human beings. But when it comes to the church, what's interesting, what we see about Jesus is he doesn't seem tribal. And that's where that story of the unauthorized exorcist, and why my identification of Jordan Peterson as that unauthorized exorcist is so foundational, because Jesus didn't seem to be terribly anxious about his intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And that confidence, I think, is a value that I I try to express in my openness, but I think it's also something that anything that I wind up putting a fair amount of my life into, I want that organization to have that as well. And my hope is, and I think I've seen some of that has come into the culture as we've established it so far. And so for me, that's part of the reason that I'm a little careful about some of
Yeah.
these church relationships. On one hand, I want to give ministers I want to give them a little vision for this can open up new conversations with people you really do want to talk to. It might not bear immediate fruit. It might not even bear fruit in your lifetime, but this is the kind of time scope that churches are used to dealing with. We plant seeds
And are capable of dealing with uniquely.
That's right. And we plant trees that will bless generations 2 or 3 generations from now. That's what we need to be doing. And so the church is too often like the Gene Wilder version of Willy Wonka, where those foolish children sell out short. And whereas, come on, kids, stay out of the fudge pond. Keep your hands off the goose laying the golden egg. Hold off on the tribal grabbiness and have a credible conversation with someone.
Yeah, well, I mean, being a little bit personal, like part of the reason why I'm excited about this is, like, honestly, I would love to be more involved with my local church than I am, but I can't be. And I just, have some natural compunction to want to be part of the kingdom work in whatever way that is available and open to me. And for whatever reason in God's plan, a lot of doors are often closed to me that I don't quite know why. Well, I do know why, but I don't know why. And so I will put my energy and my focus on those who let me. That's not an outrageous thing to do. And so this is something that I feel like I am welcome to participate in when a lot of other doors are closed. I kind of wish it wasn't this way. And for those reasons, full well that I'm scared of having this be too associated with churches. If this is like a ministry wing of the CRC church, I'll start getting the jitters. And you know full well that I am a living embodiment of what will make this a difficult sell to a lot of churches.
Yes.
Atheists and Christians, fine. Sam, less fine. And so,
because atheists are pre-Christians. Sam's a heretic.
Right. Exactly. And so I know full well, while I have been elbowing you, like, why aren't you, I've said to you, why aren't you on the cover of Christianity Today? You're more interesting than 90% of what they talk about. And so, like, why don't more people know about all of the exciting things that are going on here, which is something that I thought so many Christians have been longing for decades. And yet when it starts happening, it seems like they're, conveniently ignoring it. And it's like, what is that about? And it's because of weird political stuff going on is the only reason that I can seemingly understand. But all right, so that's the church thing. There are a whole bunch of questions and issues about how this will relate to churches and to denominations and all of that stuff. And those will be thorny, and we both generally know that. But I think the other question is how is it, so this is an estuary, right? We have saltwater creatures, we have freshwater creatures, and we have creatures like me that are capable of swimming in both, but not fully welcome in either. And how do we find the saltwater creatures, and how the saltwater creatures find us, right? And if it's just these individual ministries at a bunch of individual churches with different names and that don't have much institutional oomph behind them or don't have any media or online thing connected to them, how are they going to find the people that they want to reach? right? And that's where I think having a clearer, more transparent, easier to follow connection between the online world and the brick and mortar flesh and blood stuff, will allow for that to happen. And we need to be clearer about building that bridge such that people can cross it and find it.
I think that's true, and I think that's fair. We've, at this point, I mean, I sort of followed in Jordan Peterson's wave. The meetups have followed in my wave. My wave isn't very big, and I think what we've had to offer is a culture. Part of what I see is that most efforts to get big on the internet betray the culture we are trying to grow. I got a really lovely little note from Paul Anleitner, saying, he said, part of, Jordan Peterson got his rise because he basically, he put his surfboard onto the political riptide. And Jordan Peterson was, and this is something that I continue to make, Jordan Peterson was far more important than merely the political riptide that he put his board onto.
His most watched videos aren't his most overtly political ones.
That's right. That's right. So, but Jordan Peterson got his status rocket ride to one degree or another because of the politics. And I watch, again, that someone just sent me a video today of someone, I'm not going to name him, but when I listen to, he's an evangelical, he's basically on his video making the point that to be a Christian, you have to be a Republican. And whereas I'm a member of the Christian Reformed Church, probably 70% of the Christian Reformed Church are solid Republican voters. That's, and another 20% are solid Democratic voters, another 10% swing, or maybe that's 10% are solid Dems and 20s. I don't know what it is.
But not in the Jerry Falwell sense of swinging.
I will not play, and I think people understand that, I will not play these political games. I will critique woke religiosity from a theological point of view, because that's my interest in it. But a lot of the cheap ways to get big, I simply won't go there.
Yeah.
And
amen. And it would ruin our culture if you did.
Yes.
And
yes.
And if you did, I'm sure a lot of us out there would start poking you for it.
That's probably true. But you are right in that, partly because, we used Jordan Peterson. it wasn't, our group has for a long time not talked a lot about Jordan Peterson because he hasn't put much material into the stream. And even when he was on his book tour, he wasn't putting much material into the stream. Mm-hmm. And so we use Jordan Peterson as a way to find new conversation partners that we had a fairly high confidence level would be interested long-term conversation partners as we explore things together. Rebel Wisdom's sort of in there. Vervaeke. Vervaeke for a long time was sort of a tough sell with a lot of my audience. The Christians, he spooked the Christians too much. The Jordan Peterson, Vervaeke was just he felt a little too new agey or too lefty for some people, but I think John has demonstrated to this audience that he is a credible conversation partner who is not going to, and that's part of the culture of, as Sevilla said, this little corner of the internet where we are not playing cheap political games. everybody has their politics, you know,
Yeah.
but we are not discriminating against people because of their politics. I mean,
Right.
Mary's got her.
Even when Vervaeke and Pajot get together, they will talk about current events, right? And they'll talk about he who will not be named and stuff like that. But they're going higher. Like Vervaeke is a meta theologian. I think that's what Vervaeke is. He talks about the building blocks of theology itself, not about an individual theology per se, although sometimes that is seemingly what him and Jordan Greenhall talk about, is trying to, now that we've reverse engineered how theologies work, let's use that to build the one that we want. And so to give Andreas his due, so Andreas, you know, that he who is often first, his, like, when I've been talking with him about this, he's like, when I hear you guys talk about the estuary, it sounds like you're creating the religion that's not a religion that, you know, Vervaeke and Weinstein and others are talking about. And I'm like, I see kind of part of your point, but well, that's certainly not your goal.
Yeah.
Right.
No. I think there are some out there who, out of frustration with the churches available to them, have looked at the estuary as, oh, now I'm going to have this, this can function in my life like my church. Probably not.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. And this is why, I mean, Luke is like, well, the church should be this way. I'm putting it outside the walled garden of the church for this reason. Now, that doesn't mean that individuals won't derive, hopefully, some spiritual sustenance by listening to me and others think out loud. And I mean, I do theology on my channel, some of it. And so the fact that people are deriving some spiritual sustenance and edification from that, many people have told me they derived much from Jordan Peterson. So I am not going to, certain Spanish words work better than English words, are still in my head. I'm not going to dismiss or disparage people for having that dynamic in their life. And I would estimate at least 50% of North Americans who identify as Christian are, in the words of the Seeker movement, unchurched. And so the degree that these people can find something on Living Stones Online or on my YouTube channel, I am not going to despise them for that. I think eventually they are going to, they should look for a way to get into a in-person church. If some estuary local chapters actually become churches or church plants grow out of them, I'd be thrilled. So I'm not cutting off those avenues, but by positioning estuary as downstream from the church, that's part of my intentionality here, in that I am not trying to start a new religion. I already have one. Our Catholic members have one. Our Orthodox members, our Protestant members have them. Some who are in other religious traditions, you know, but I'm not going to give the cliche line like, well, anyway, I won't go there.
Yeah, we coexist, but we don't have coexist bumper stickers.
Right. And so, no, we are not trying to start a new religion, and any attempt to start a new Vanderklay religion, that I will get angry about, because I already have a religion and I have a master. So, you know, I'm taken.
Right. And, but I do think that, so obviously there's a couple things that are slowing us down at the moment. COVID is just a huge hamper on all of our plans at the moment, but at some point it'll go away, hopefully. And like I've said this a couple times, it's like we're sitting at a red light And we could either have our engines revving, waiting for the light to turn green, or we could be caught asleep at the wheel when it does. And so I feel like this is a good opportunity for us to start to lay the groundwork and the plans and the institutions that will then be able to actually be implemented once COVID goes away. Another thing that's kind of slowing us down is the absence of Jordan Peterson, right? He was something of the engine, or, you know, something of the pathway into this corner of the internet for a whole bunch of people. And that has, you know, that bridge has kind of fallen away. And so there's a bunch of people who are already in, and we still get some new people, but the influx of new people is slower than it used to be, mainly for that reason.
Jordan Peterson was sort of like a hurricane that blew all this salt water up into the estuary, all the way up rivers into churches. So
yes, but who knows? He could come back, right?
It could be Hurricane Jordan 2.0. Who knows?
Right, the second advent, and that we could be ready for that if that were to happen. Yeah. But I'm not just here to say, oh, we just need to grow faster and we need to be concerned about numbers and stuff like that. I think some people interpreted me as saying that, and that's not what I'm saying. I think that you are right, and Joey said something similar, that really what we have to offer is a culture that we have helped foster and develop. Part of that is that we selected for a group of people that kind of already had a bunch of those traits, because it took a certain kind of person to get all the way to the Discord server. But also, I think that through our interactions, through your channel, through the conversations, through the other channels, we've embodied a culture that is spreading, right? People learn, people watch others, they see how others interact, and they start to imitate that consciously and unconsciously. But that is something that can only grow so quickly. A culture like that, yes, it can grow, yes, it can spread, but only at the speed of interpersonal transmission. And that is limited. And if we try and accelerate faster than that, then we will be turning into something that we aren't currently now, right? Instead of spreading what we currently aren't now. And so but if we don't grow, then we'll become decadent, and slowly people drift away and sort of will be stuck with the hardest core of the hardest core. And that's not really even what the hardcore want anyway. And so that's what I'm saying. And I feel like when I've been hearing you talk about that, Shrey, it sounds more Sacramento-centric than what I and a lot of other people who are perhaps further away from Sacramento envision and kind of hope for, because we hope that it will include us, and I don't want to just make you the bottleneck and that you have to do everything. I'm just saying, here's what you need to do while I get to sit on my butt and just watch you do it. You know, there's a whole bunch of us out there that I think have energy and talents that we're ready and willing to pour in to make this happen. But we do also need you in some ways and in some capacities. And how exactly that works out, we'll have to figure out along the way.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about, I've had a number of ideas that I haven't talked about yet. I think I would like to organize a. You see, this is where the distance and the internet factor is different from a lot of the other work that I do. Like in my church work, I would get people in a room together. Mm-hmm. And I would facilitate a process, and because I have relationships with multiple of you, I would start to get that going, and that might happen. The difficulty when you start taking those steps, you already start to develop your hierarchy, because now we're going to have Job and Sam and Joey and Tyler and Warren and Vendonk and so now suddenly what we're doing is we're taking, because you can only do it with a certain number of individuals, because again, you've got the scale thing that happens with hierarchy. So now suddenly we have the rings are getting more defined, and we've already noticed some of those tensions in the Bridges of Meaning Discord, because part of the new playing around with Friday question and answer is let's give some other people a chance to be in the inner ring. So you get these inner ring dynamics already forming, and part of me would like to hold those dynamics off as long as possible. Also because even though, you know, we've had now conversations on the Discord server, we've had conversations on Zoom, because we haven't had the face-to-face, person-to-person interactions, there's levels we don't know each other yet on. I mean,
I've still never met you face to face.
I know.
We've spent a lot of time talking, but I've still never seen you. I don't even know how tall you are. I think you're tall, but I could be surprised either way.
Rumor has it. But and so that's, you know, my original plan was much more, we were going to do the West Coast tour. I'm going to get out to Chicago, you know, going to do another retreat. Thunder Bay is going to happen. And you could see basically, so March was the retreat. September was the Thunder Bay. And I was really anticipating that Thunder Bay event was going to, you know, so then you can really have an idea about who's really excited about this if they're going to get to Thunder Bay.
Yes.
It's kind of a sorting process. I mean, Warren's planning on coming to Thunder Bay whenever it happens. And I want you and Warren to meet. And because what I have a sense of is that there are more of you out there than you know. And I regularly get emails and correspondence from people who haven't written me before, but have been watching for a while. And even a Discord server, as a mediums have bandwidths, and I think we have a pretty good idea now sort of what the Discord server can manage, which is why when Charlie starts the Outpost, you know, who knows how many Discord servers we actually need in terms of those communities to flourish. So there's a lot going on here, but I agree with you that we ought to take advantage of this COVID pause and do some groundwork. Now, part of what I've been, and I've given Joey and Tyler some at Living Stones, one of the things that we've been working on is we've now got a package. So we've got a church app. So I don't really have that fully together. We have a new church website, but we also have some church administrative software. This church administrative software is really set for doing the kinds of things we're doing, because there's a fair amount of overlap in terms of churches and this kind of work. It involves communication. If we want to do a conference, it involves payment. I mean, all of this stuff. And so we've got some tools now that we can leverage, because Living Stones is worship service and some Bible studies and, you know, some face-to-face diaconal work. That's what Living Stones is. That's all it is. It's a small church. But the software has a lot of potential that Living Stones is not going to take advantage of. And we can leverage some of that potential to start to build that program. And a lot of your ideas, you know, I would like to see, I would like to see us do some of what, you know, we see some of what Rebel Wisdom is doing, you know, what Pangburn failed at. I would like to, you know, some of the retreat stuff. And I think, you know, because retreat is sort of, Rebel Wisdom does like men's stuff and Pangbird at the conferences. And I would like to see us develop that. And then the question is, okay, what are our next steps? And I am still, I like, for example, you know, Warren in Australia has bunches of blokes, and you probably don't know anything about bunches of blokes.
I don't.
It's sort of an Australian, it's very estuary-like, but it's kind of a men's gathering thing. And it's sort of a Promise Keepers thing. It doesn't really have the elements of Promise Keepers, but it's that type of thing. And they want to bring bunch of blokes to America. And so he's like, well, I said, it's an estuary-like thing. So, you know, there might be some, but I would rather not have one curriculum. So when I look at the woman and her mom's thing, nothing against that, but that's a good vehicle if Paul Vanderklay decides he wants to be, you know, a celebrity estuary. And so we'll have little Paul Vanderklay meetups and we'll have Paul Vanderklay groups, but the emphasis of, see, I'm not quite as narrow in terms of the mom thing. I'm a little too broad. That's part of the reason I don't want to do that. But I have thought of having monthly themes where I'll make 2 or 3 videos in a month on a particular thing. That can be a concentrated conversation piece. But part of the challenge that we face is that Jordan Peterson was so broad that under his banner, you had some men's movement type stuff.
Yeah.
Christianity stuff, psychology stuff, Jungian stuff. I mean, it was just
academic stuff. Yeah.
Academic stuff, philosophy, you know, evolutionary psychology. I mean, it was just so broad. And that one of the things that I've noticed in helping to start different meetups have different concentrations depending on who the people are. Like our local Jordan Peterson meetup has a lot of conversations that single young men need to have. And so a big piece of our particular meetup is the fact that we have some younger guys and some older guys, and there's a fair amount of wisdom transmission. Now,
yeah, same in Chicago.
Someone might look at my channel and maybe see some of that, and there was some of Jordan Peterson, but if we were to say what our Bridges of Meaning is about is, you know, basically wisdom development for young men. Well, now we've got a niche, and niches are powerful because, you know, it's concentrated and it's focused. But suddenly, you know, how many of the in the Discord would sort of be, that's not my niche.
That's not what I showed up here for.
That's not what I showed up here for. And this is sort of where someone should pause and come to an appreciation of the genius of the church. Because whereas if you do enough church shopping, and I'm sure you have, given your searches, your circumstance, you very quickly see that churches have specialities and interests and so on and so forth, but somehow in the church they cohere together. And so I'm reluctant to, you know, either make it the Paul Vanderklay Celebrity Corporation or a niche corporation, because if people are actually going to, part of the difficulty we have in our culture right now is there's so much speciality and specializations that people's lives get segmented. So now they're in the moms group, but then pretty soon, you know, what happens to those women when their moms go off to college? You know, wait till your kids go off to college and see what that does to your wife. You know, suddenly they're having an identity crisis because they were a mom. And suddenly the college kids are like, stop momming me. Stop momming me. If you don't stop momming me, you know, so, and so we've, at this point at least, managed to have a culture where we actually have a fair amount of diversity, and that diversity also holds interest better, because you don't get tired. Oh no, we're going to talk about, you know, this subject over here. So that's part of the dynamic of why, you know, we need to build a platform, but I don't want to build the Paul Vanderklay groups or
and that was, so part of my suggestion in my last video I actually thought was a decently good one, that was sort of making perhaps a new YouTube channel, whether it's called The Estuary or whether it's called Bridges Over Estuaries or whatever, estuary Bridges of Meaning groups or whatever it is, whatever it's called, or something else, that was sort of like trying to be something like a central hub in this corner of the internet that wasn't tied to any particular one person, that perhaps had a rotating cast of hosts and curators, that would like interview you and interview Peugeot and interview Bishop Barron and interview Mary Cohen and all of these people and make commentary videos on all of them, and then maybe serve some role in terms of making announcements and stuff like that for the things that are going on, where it was sort of basically just trying to summarize what it is that the average consumer viewer in this corner of the internet likes, and helping tie it all together and sort of like representing them, but not being the name of any particular person. It's sort of like, it's basically Randos United with more structure and more strategy and more organization, which is the theme of this thing. It's like, here's kind of what we're already doing. Let's just be a little bit better at it.
Yeah.
And so just sort of a slightly better version of Randos United.
And I think that's a great idea, and I'd love to see that happen. YouTube is an interesting place in terms of videos and in terms of developing a following. It isn't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Yeah, it's a great idea. I don't quite know how to pull it off, because you know, like you said, sort of sounds like Randos United, but
I'm not claiming too much creativity with any of these things. I'm just saying, here's what we're already doing. Let's just, you know, a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think part of this is, it's interesting to me. So tomorrow myself and Peugeot and Vervaeke have a video scheduled where we're going to have a conversation together. I like your idea. I don't know if the timing is now.
Okay.
I don't
know either. Yeah.
I don't know either, because I suspect that if we tried to start such a thing now, we'd sort of get what we've already got. And so part of me wonders if, you know, and again, the second coming of Jordan Peterson. If Jordan comes back, boy, I could talk about that for a long time, because I've thought a fair amount about it. It's just so hard to know. So I think right now what I would like to do is find a way for us to put, you know, because right now I have to wrap this up by 4-ish. So
Sure.
Right now, Vendonk has sort of been, you know, it was Vendonk and Job that did the West Coast tour. And of course, Job, you know, some people want to see me, some people want to see Job. And it would be better if we had a bigger platform, more organization. We can, you know, and I was thinking probably another retreat at my sister's place. I was thinking, I was all, you know, part of what Rick and I here at Living Stones are said, we're putting a ton of work right now. When you look at the Discord question and answer stuff, that Rick and I are playing with things, and basically we're setting up equipment and stuff here at Living Stones so that we can put on a conference here and probably bring in some other YouTubers and do a 2 or 3 day conference. And at Living Stones, you know, that level would probably be 100 people, let's say. And, you know, now again, because of the software, we can do registration. I mean, we can do a lot of things, but this is obviously going to happen post-COVID. Sacramento's a nice place to fly into.
It's a little easier than Thunder Bay.
It's a little easier than Thunder Bay. So, and so, you know, but you're exactly right. If we had a bit more of a platform, we could begin to start putting things it's hard to put things on calendars right now because of COVID, but at
Yeah.
some point, probably, hopefully by December or the spring, we can start to put things on calendars and say, okay, we're going to hit these cities going up and down. And if we had more structure and organization, you're exactly right. It would be better if I could say to Rob, who's the pastor at Salem, Rob, here's a little bit more of a group. And so, you know, Rob's ducked his head into the estuary a few times, but pastors get busy because they have day jobs and families and all those things. And so you're exactly right. If we had a little bit more of a program, but again, the question is, basically when I would go into a place to start a new meetup, it's all just facilitation skills. I go in with zero agenda. Now, that's deceptive because many of the people have been watching my channel, so they've been brought up to speed in terms of a conversation. So I sort of know where the conversation's going to go. But as I've done with the videos, okay, what's your story? And I sort of help people give little snippets of their story, because something fundamental in this that is, in my opinion, anti-celebrity has to be the valued stories of the individuals in the group. And so that's another challenge in this, that part of me in this culture wants there to be an anti-celebrity aspect to it.
Yeah.
Where it's not the Paul show, and
you're not just a night with mooks. This isn't just the mook troop formulation exercise. Right.
Yeah. So I agree, and I'd like to find some new ways to develop this. And yeah, you know, how I'm just, you know, if you would say, Paul, you had to do this tomorrow, I could lay out, okay, we'll do this, because as a pastor working in denominations, working in organizations, there are certain ways that organizations tend to approach these things. And I've had experience with all of that. And part of my experience is there are ways to do it quickly, but there are always trade-offs with these ways. Okay, so now here's our board, or here are our stakeholders. Well, once we do that, now suddenly we've got other people on the fringe, and we've got an inner ring, we've got an outer ring. You've always got those things naturally, but that's part of the reason that it's been much more ad hoc. That, okay, Vendonk wants to do this, and Job's on board, and actually Vendonk has another organization that was actually paying for gas for the tour. And so there's been a lot of other things sort of behind the scenes that I've known. And there are resources that can be available to us, because there are some people kind of that have said to me, you know, there could be some, you know, there's interest in financial backing, but I don't want to make those asks until here's our plan. We're going to do a conference. These are the people we want at the conference. We're going to need this much seed money, you know, but I don't think we're at that level yet. We've done a retreat. Probably next step is a conference here at Living Stones, just because I got the facility.
Right.
We got the volunteers in terms of the meetup. And this is also part of the reason that I say, you and Hank want to say, no, we're going to do, the first conference is going to be in Chicago. and I say, go for it. You know, say, we're going to get Vanderclay, and then put your list together. And, you know, we're going to get these people, and we're going to do it in Chicago, and we can find a space, or we'll maybe have Paul help us find a space, but we'll get a space, and we're going to do a conference, and these are the dates. And, you know, Joey and Tyler, you know, you snooze, you lose, boys. So, and it's that non-centralized dynamic that I also want to incentivize.
Right.
So,
and for this to work, it'll need to be the sort of thing where there aren't barriers for the volunteers to be able to contribute in the ways that they want to.
right.
But it's also the structure that affords them to be contributing to something.
Right.
Right. And gives them a mission and a role, right? That they can volunteer to sign up for.
And it is also the case, as many have said, there needs to be a financial aspect to this. At
Mhm.
some point, whether it's a 501c3 or whether we, my bias has tended to be we run it. It's some of this stuff is easy to run through a church because you've got certain advantages by virtue of how churches work money-wise in America. And
Mhm.
it can legitimately be considered a ministry by a church to do this
Mhm.
kind of thing. Livingstone struggles in terms of administrative volunteers, but it doesn't have to be Livingstone's. It could be, Cross Point in Southern California is a large church. But if we decide to go the 501c3 aspect, that's okay too. It's just that when now we get our 501c3, now we have to have a board. Now, and part of it is that I listened to your vision. I listened to the vision of some of the others out there. There are some differences in these visions. And I
Yeah.
don't want to waste a lot of time putting a bunch of you in the room and watching the expected spat over the non-overlapping aspects of your visions and the priorities that a centralized thing would need to create. So
Mhm.
part of me would say, let the Chicago Discord shame everybody else by just how good and smart and how much you're doing. Put the Sacramento meetup to shame. And maybe 2-3 years from now, there'll be a clear something will emerge that everyone around will say, we're going with them. They got their act together. They've got the culture right. They've got some language on this that actually works and is cohesive, and they've put together stakeholders and they're really going. I'd love to see that happen.
Okay, well, we'll do our best. Chicagoans are known for getting things done.
City of broad shoulders.
The city that works.
The city that works. And you Chicago guys, you got a lot of talent there. You got some entrepreneurial gifts. So I say put everyone to shame. And so, hey, we're going to hire Vanderclay away from Livingstone. So, hey, go for it. Do what you can. So,
All right.
or maybe you find someone better than Vanderclay and you hire him or her. I'd say go for that too. So.
All right. Well,
We got a minute or two if you got any last words, Sam. I kind of hogged the end of it here.
Oh, well, what I'm not trying to do is trying to put this in a bottle and sell it. But what I do just wish that there was just something a little bit easier to communicate about and to share. And that doesn't seem quite there yet. And I think we need to move in that direction.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, thank you, Sam. And yeah, we'll keep talking. And again, I'd like to, here's an irony. Thunder Bay wasn't on any of our radars. And they came up with and I was the third one to be invited, or the fourth actually, because there's a local professor of the local university there that's also going to be talking with us. But they took the initiative and put something together, and history favors the bold.
Mm-hmm. All
right, Sam. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you too.
We'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.